The river didn't sound like mercy. It sounded like teeth, water gnawing stone, ripping foam into the shallows, dragging anything careless enough to slip from the bank. In the village of Brackenridge, they called it the Wraithwater, because it ran black under moonlight and swallowed secrets without bubbles. The current carved through the old wood like a living boundary, separating the human world from something older, something that watched from the shadows with eyes that gleamed pale gold. And on this night, beneath a moon fat and silver, the river was drowning more than secrets. It was drowning a wolf, a creature too large to be ordinary, with fur the color of ash and winter storms. The kind of wolf that shouldn't exist, according to the village elders. The kind that wore intelligence in its gaze instead of hunger. The kind that marked the beginning of a war no one was ready to fight. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are watching from. Now let's get to the story. In Brackenridge, cottages huddled together like frightened children, their thatched roofs sloping low as if trying to hide from the wilderness that pressed against the village borders. Smoke curled from chimneys in thin, hesitant threads. Wooden fences marked property lines with a kind of desperation that said the people inside knew exactly how fragile those boundaries were. This was a place that survived by staying small, staying quiet, and staying afraid. Maren walked alone through the evening mist, a woven basket hooked over one arm, her skirts already damp from the wet grass that clung to the riverbank. Her dark hair fell loose around her shoulders, wild in a way that made the village women purse their lips. Her eyes, the color of smoke and storm clouds, held a sharpness that came from 3 years of watching her back. She was barely 23 winters old, but she carried herself like someone who had already survived a lifetime. Her dress was simple, rough-spun wool the color of faded autumn, patched at the elbows and hem where the fabric had worn thin from use. But there was something in the way she moved, a quiet grace, a refusal to shrink, that made her impossible to ignore, even when the villagers tried. Maren had been an outcast since the fever came, since it took her father, the village's best hunter, and left her alone in a cottage that smelled like herbs and loneliness. The whispers started the week after his burial. Misfortune follows her, they said. Bad luck clings to her like smoke. They blamed her for the blight that ruined old Garrick's wheat, for the miller's daughter's stillborn child, for the early frost that killed the apple harvest. None of it was true. But truth didn't matter when fear needed a face. And a young woman with no family, no husband, and a talent for healing that the goodwives called unnatural made an easy target. So Maren learned to keep her head down, to speak only when spoken to make herself invisible when the village needed someone to blame. But beneath the silence, beneath the careful steps and lowered eyes, there burned a fire that refused to go out. A stubborn, reckless need to prove that mercy still mattered, even when the world had shown her none. As Maren approached the village square, she heard voices rising in sharp, jagged bursts. A crowd had gathered near the old stone well, their faces lit by the orange glow of lanterns that swung like angry fireflies in the dusk. Men stood in tight clusters, arms crossed, jaws set. Women clutched their shawls and herded children behind their skirts. The air tasted like smoke and adrenaline. Maren's instincts told her to turn away, to slip past unnoticed and head home before anyone remembered she existed. But something pulled her closer. Some invisible thread tugged at her ribs, the same pull she'd felt that morning when she woke with her heart racing and the smell of pine in her throat, even though no pine grew near her cottage. She stopped at the edge of the crowd, half hidden in shadow, and listened. "Beast took 2 goats last night," a gruff voice said. She recognized Corvin Bale, the blacksmith, a man built like a boulder with a voice that could crack stone. "Dragged them clean over the boundary markers. Didn't even eat them. Just killed them and left the bodies like a message." "Wolf tracks," another man added, his voice tight with fear. Pruitt, the miller's son, barely older than Maren but already drunk on the power of carrying a torch. "But bigger than any wolf I've ever seen." The prints were the size of a man's hand, and there were dozens of them. A whole pack. An old woman pulled her shawl tighter, her face pale in the firelight. "My grandmother used to tell stories about them. The river pack, she called them. Wolves that think like men. Wolves that remember grudges and keep oaths. She said they were cursed, trapped between two worlds, and that the Wraithwater was their border. Stories, Corvin scoffed, though his eyes betrayed him. They're animals. Dangerous, yes, but animals. We set traps, we hunt them, and we end this before it gets worse. Then why do the tracks vanish at the river's edge? An older man asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Why do hunters who go into the old wood come back talking about eyes in the dark? Eyes that watch and wait and understand. He paused, his hands trembling. My brother went into those woods 15 years ago, tracking a wounded stag. We found his bow. We found his knife. But we never found him. The crowd murmured, a low hum of fear and fury. Maren felt the weight of it pressing down, the way violence always started, with frightened people looking for something to destroy before it destroyed them. And somewhere, deep in her chest, that strange pull flared hotter, like a compass pointing toward the river, toward the old wood, toward something waiting in the dark. She didn't know it yet, but the river had already chosen her. And tonight, it would ask her to choose in return. She didn't know it yet, but the river had already chosen her. And tonight, it would ask her to choose in return. Maren turned away from the crowd before anyone noticed her standing there. Her hands trembled as she clutched her basket tighter, the pull in her chest growing stronger with every step toward the river. She told herself she was going home, that she would bar her door, tend her herbs, and wait for the storm to pass like she always did. But her feet carried her past her cottage, past the last fence post that marked the edge of safe ground, past the place where sensible people turn back, toward the Wraithwater. The forest swallowed sound the moment she crossed the boundary. The rush of the river dulled to a whisper. The angry voices from the village faded into nothing, as if the trees themselves had drawn a curtain between worlds. Maren's breath misted in the sudden cold, and the air tasted different here, sharp with pine and something older, something that made the hairs on her arms stand on end. Ancient markers rose from the moss-covered ground, stones carved with symbols she didn't recognize but somehow understood. Warnings, borders, promises made in blood and kept for centuries. The bond in her chest pulled tighter, a thread winding through her ribs, leading her deeper into the old wood. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt like she was walking toward something that had been waiting for her all along. The trees opened into a clearing that shouldn't exist. Not a wild tangle of undergrowth, but an organized settlement that looked like it had grown from the forest itself. Lodges built from living wood, their walls woven from branches still thick with leaves. Watch posts perched high in the ancient oaks, connected by rope bridges that swayed in the night breeze. Smoke curled from fire pits, carrying the scent of roasted meat and unfamiliar herbs. And everywhere there were wolves. Dozens of them, moving between the lodges with purpose. Some walked on 4 legs, their eyes gleaming in the firelight. Others stood on 2, their forms shifting seamlessly between human and beast, as if the line between the two had never really existed. Children, some with wolf ears and tails, chased each other around the fire pits. Elders sat in circles, their weathered faces both human and animal, their voices low and measured. This wasn't a pack of mindless beasts. This was a society ancient and intricate. Hidden in the heart of the forest the village had always feared. Rorik stood at the center of it all, his presence unmistakable even in the chaos. He turned as Maren approached, and the bond between them flared so bright she nearly gasped. His pale gold eyes found hers across the clearing, and something in his expression softened, just for a moment. Then the others noticed her. A woman emerged from one of the larger lodges, her silver hair braided with bone beads and dried herbs. Her face was sharp, all hard angles and stern lines, but her hands moved with the practiced gentleness of a healer as she approached. She smelled like feverfew and willow bark, and her eyes, pale green as spring leaves, assessed Maren with a kind of scrutiny that missed nothing. Edda Thornvale, Rorik said quietly. Our healer. She'll tend to your hands. Maren looked down and realized her palms were still torn from the trap. Dried blood crusted around the cuts she'd barely noticed in her rush to save him. Edda took her wrists without asking, turning her hands over in the firelight. "River iron," Edda said, her voice rough as tree bark. "Cuts deep. Scars deeper." She glanced at Rorik, then back at Maren. "You pulled the alpha from a killing trap with your bare hands. Either you're very brave or very foolish." "Both," Maren whispered. Edda's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "At least you're honest." She gestured toward one of the lodges. "Come. I'll clean these before infection sets in." But before Maren could move, a massive figure stepped into her path. A man built like a mountain, with shoulders broad enough to block the firelight and a face carved from stone and fury. His eyes, darker than Rorik's but just as wolf-bright, fixed on Maren with open hostility. "Garan's stone howl," Rorik said, and there was a warning in his voice. "My war captain. She shouldn't be here." Garen's voice was a growl that vibrated in Maren's chest. "She smells like village smoke and fear. She'll bring hunters down on us. She already has. She saved my life," Rorik said evenly. "Or she baited the trap herself." Garan crossed his arms. "Humans lie, Rorik. They've lied to us for generations. What makes this one different?" Before Rorik could answer, a younger woman slipped between them, lean and sharp-eyed, with hair the color of ravens and a grin that promised trouble. She circled Maren like a predator, but her curiosity felt more playful than threatening. "Sable," she introduced herself, ignoring Garen's glare. "Gout. Oi. Generally insufferable, according to Garan." She leaned closer, sniffing. "You don't smell like bait. You smell like yarrow and river clay and something else. Something that makes my hackles rise in a good way." She tilted her head. "Did you really pull him out of the wraithwater?" Maren nodded, unsure how to respond. Sable's grin widened. "I like her." "Your approval means nothing," Garan snapped. "Council," Rorik said, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "Now." The council gathered in the largest lodge, a circular space lit by fire pits and oil lamps that cast dancing shadows on the carved walls. Wolves in human form sat on benches arranged in concentric circles, their faces ranging from curious to hostile. Maren stood at the center, acutely aware that she was surrounded, outnumbered, and entirely at their mercy. Rorik stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. The bond hummed between them, a living thing that everyone in the room could sense. "The claim is made," an elder said, his voice crackling like dry leaves. "The river witnessed it. The bond answers." "It's a liability," Garan argued. "She's human. He's weak. And the moment her people discover she's here, they'll use her against us." "Or she's the bridge the old prophecies spoke of," Edda countered. "The one who crosses the boundary when both sides have forgotten how." "Prophecies are convenient excuses for foolish choices," Garan shot back. Rorik's jaw tightened. "The bond cannot be undone. It can only be honored or resisted, and resistance costs us both. When she's in pain, I feel it. When I'm threatened, she'll sense it. The river's magic doesn't ask permission. It only demands truth." Maren's breath caught. She hadn't realized the bond went that deep, that permanent. She thought of the pull she'd felt in the village square, the way her chest had ached when the crowd spoke of hunting wolves. "Then she's a weakness we can't afford," Garan said flatly. "Send her back. Let the bond fade." "It won't fade," Edda said quietly. "It will burn. Both of them from the inside out, until there's nothing left but ash and regret." The room fell silent. Sable broke it. "Well, that's cheerful." Rorik turned to Maren, his eyes searching hers. "I won't force this on you. If you want to leave, I'll escort you to the boundary myself. But know what you're choosing." Maren opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Sable burst through the lodge entrance, her face pale, her breath coming in sharp gasps. "Rorik," she said urgently. The scouts just returned. The goat kills, they check the tracks again. They're wrong. Wrong how? Rorik demanded. Too clean. Wongate. The prints were pressed into the mud, not torn. And they smelled like smoke and iron, not pack. Sable's eyes flickered to Maren. Someone's framing us. Maren's stomach dropped. Corvin, she whispered. Every head turned toward her. The blacksmith, she continued, her voice gaining strength. He makes traps. Illegal ones with teeth designed to torture, not kill. I saw his workshop once years ago. The trap I pulled from Rorik's shoulder, the craftsmanship, it matches Corvin's work. Rorik's expression darkened. He wants a war. And he'll get one if we don't stop this, Garan said. Before anyone could respond, a commotion erupted outside. The sound of bodies hitting the ground. Maren's heart slammed against her ribs as the lodge flap tore open and two wolves half carried, half dragged a third between them. The wounded wolf collapsed onto the packed earth floor, blood pooling beneath him. An arrow jutted from his shoulder, the fletching unmistakable even in the dim light. Village maid. Brackenridge colors. Garan roared, his form rippling, claws sprouting from his fingertips. Enough talk. We end this tonight. No, Rorik commanded, but his voice shook with barely controlled rage. His eyes had gone full wolf, burning gold in the firelight. Edda rushed to the wounded wolf's side, already pulling supplies from her satchel. Maren moved without thinking, kneeling beside her, her healer's instincts overriding her fear. Let me help, she said. Edda glanced at her, then nodded. Hold him steady. Sable appeared in the doorway again, her face grim. Rorik. Hunters. At least a dozen, moving through the old wood with torches. They're headed this way. The council chamber erupted in growls and snarls. Garen's voice rose above the chaos. They've declared war. We answer with fangs. Rorik's hands clenched into fists. Maren could feel his struggle through the bond. The war between his duty to protect his pack and his desperate need to avoid the bloodshed that would doom them all. He looked at Maren, and in his eyes, she saw the question he couldn't ask aloud. What do we do when mercy runs out? The torches drew closer, their light flickering through the trees like hungry stars. And Maren realized that tonight, the forest would burn one way or another, unless she found a way to stop it. Wait. Maren's voice cut through the chaos like a blade through silk. Every head turned toward her, wolf eyes gleaming in the firelight. Let me go back. Garan laughed, sharp and bitter. So you can lead them straight to us. Tell them our numbers, our defenses. So I can stop this before it starts, Maren shot back. She turned to Rorik, her heart hammering. There's someone in the village who might listen. Sister Anwen, the lay sister who tends the apothecary. She helped my father when he was dying. She's not like the others. She remembers the old ways, the old agreements. Rorik's eyes searched hers, the bond between them pulling taut as a bowstring. And if she won't listen, if they seize you the moment you step foot in Brackenridge, then at least I tried. Maren's hands clenched. But if your wolves attack first, there's no going back. Every child in that village will grow up hating you. Every generation will teach the next to fear the forest. The cycle never ends unless someone breaks it. Silence stretched like a held breath. She's right, Edda said quietly. War is easy. Peace requires courage. Garen's jaw worked. Courage doesn't stop arrows. But it might stop the hands that loose them, Sable added, surprising everyone. She looked at Maren with something like respect. I'll go with her. Keep her alive long enough to make her speech. Rorik stood perfectly still for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once, sharp as a blade. You go with escort. Sable and two others, hidden in the shadows. If anyone lays hands on you, they pull you out. His eyes darkened. And Maren, I won't beg your people for mercy. But if you can create an opening, I'll meet them at the boundary. I'll offer truce terms. Once. Once is all we need. Maren whispered. Rorik stepped closer, his hand lifting to her face but stopping just short of touching. The bond flared between them, warm and insistent. If they hurt you, I'll feel it. And I won't be able to stop what happens next. Then I won't let them hurt me. His mouth curved, not quite a smile. Stubborn human. Reckless wolf. The village looked different through the eyes of someone who'd crossed the boundary and come back. Smaller somehow. More fragile. Maren kept her hood pulled low as she moved through the narrow streets, the bond in her chest thrumming like a second heartbeat. Somewhere in the darkness behind her, Sable and the others ghosted through shadows, invisible but present. Voices drifted from the village square, and Maren pressed herself against the side of the cooper's shop, listening. We burn the old wood edge at dawn, Corvin's voice rang out, strong and certain. Drive them out of their dens, force them into the open where we can see them coming. And salt the earth, another man added. Make sure nothing grows back. Make sure they can't hide. Maren's stomach turned. They weren't talking about defense. They were talking about annihilation. She peered around the corner and saw Corvin standing on an overturned cart, the goat carcasses displayed at his feet like trophies. The wounds looked savage, torn and brutal, exactly the kind of violence that would fuel fear. But Maren had dressed enough animal wounds to know the difference between a predator's kill and a butcher's work. These cuts were too precise, too deliberate. The wolves are testing our boundaries, Corvin declared, his voice carrying across the square. They took our livestock tonight. Tomorrow it'll be our children. We can't wait for them to strike first. The crowd murmured agreement, fear turning to anger, anger hardening into resolve. Maren turned away, her pulse racing, and slipped toward the small stone building at the village edge where Sister Anwen kept her apothecary. Light glowed in the window, warm and steady. Maren knocked 3 times, the old signal her father had taught her. The door opened a crack, and a weathered face peered out. Sister Anwen was perhaps 50 winters old, her gray hair bound in a simple braid, her hands stained with herb residue. Her eyes widened when she recognized Maren. Child, she whispered urgently. You shouldn't be here. They're hunting for wolves, and anyone who doesn't join the hunt will be suspected of sympathizing. I need your help, Maren said. Please. Sister Anwen hesitated, then pulled her inside, barring the door behind them. The apothecary smelled like dried lavender and old parchment. Shelves lined the walls, filled with jars and bundles of herbs. A single candle burned on a desk covered in ledgers and loose pages. Tell me quickly, Sister Anwen said. Maren spoke in a rush, words tumbling over each other. The wolf in the river. Trap. Ban. The pack settlement, organized and ancient, nothing like the mindless beasts the village imagined. The evidence that someone was framing them, staging attacks to provoke war. Sister Anwen listened without interrupting, her expression growing more troubled with each word. Corvin, she said finally. It would be Corvin. You believe me. I believe power makes men dangerous. Sister Anwen moved to her desk, pulling out a leather-bound ledger worn soft with age. Your father wasn't the first to speak of the old agreements. When I was a girl there was a truce. Boundaries marked and honored. The river pack defended the old wood. We kept to cleared land. Livestock losses were rare, always compensated. She opened the ledger, flipping through pages covered in faded ink. Then a fire. 17 years ago, it burned half the village. Destroyed homes, killed livestock, left families desperate. Her finger traced a column of names. Corvin's father owned the only forge still standing. He made his fortune rebuilding, charging prices that left people in debt for years. Maren's breath caught. The fire wasn't an accident. No one could prove it. But the old treaty died in those flames. Sister Anwen's eyes were sad. And Corvin learned that fear is profitable. Before Maren could respond, the door crashed open. Pruitt stood in the doorway, 3 other men behind him, torches held high. His eyes locked on Maren, and his face twisted with triumph. "I knew it," he spat. "I knew you'd come back. You reek of them, Maren. Like smoke and wild things." Maren backed toward the far wall, but there was nowhere to go. The men spread out, blocking the exit. "She consorts with beasts," one of them said, the words dripping with disgust. Pruitt grabbed Maren's wrist, yanking her forward into the candlelight. His grip burned against the spot where her blood had touched Rorik's wound, and the bond flared so hot Maren gasped. The skin there glowed faintly, a shimmer of gold that pulsed in time with her heartbeat. "Look," Pruitt breathed, showing the others. "She's marked. Claimed by them." The men recoiled, crossing themselves. One whispered a prayer. "Corvin needs to see this," Pruitt said, dragging Maren toward the door. Sister Anwen stepped between them. "Let her go. She's done nothing wrong." "She's a witch," Pruitt snarled. "And witches burn." They dragged Maren into the square, where Corvin still held court. The crowd turned as one, faces illuminating with firelight and something darker. Hunger for violence. Relief at having a target. Corvin's eyes gleamed when he saw her. "Well, the wolf's whore returns." Maren jerked against Pruitt's grip, fury overriding fear. "You staged the attacks. You want this war." "I want to protect my people," Corvin said smoothly. "And you, Maren Holt, have betrayed yours." He turned to the crowd. "She spent the night in the old wood. She bears their mark. And now she comes back, reeking of wolf stench, trying to sow doubt. Because someone is framing them." Maren shouted. "The tracks are wrong. The kills are too clean. You're manufacturing fear so you can." Corvin backhanded her across the face. The crack echoed across the square. Maren tasted blood, the bond in her chest screaming with shared pain. Somewhere in the forest, she knew Rorik felt it. "Seize her," Corvin ordered. "We'll question her properly at dawn. And if she won't tell us where the wolves hide, we'll stake her at the boundary as bait." Hands grabbed Maren from all sides. She struggled, but there were too many, too strong. They bound her wrists with rough rope that bit into her skin. And then she saw it. Through the open door of Corvin's workshop, illuminated by forge light, half-finished traps hung from hooks. The same jagged teeth. The same unusual alloy that had torn Rorik's shoulder. And on the worktable, a broken arrowhead, its fletching the exact match to the one buried in the wounded wolf's flesh. "Sister Anwen!" Maren screamed. "The workshop! Look in the workshop!" The lay sister moved fast for someone her age, ducking past Pruitt and darting into the smithy before anyone could stop her. She emerged seconds later, holding the broken arrow high. "This is village-made," she said, her voice ringing clear. "And it's fresh. Corvin, why do you have an arrow matching the one that wounded the Riverpack wolf today?" The crowd shifted, uncertain. Corvin's face darkened. "She planted it. The witch and her accomplice." "I've been in the apothecary all evening," Sister Anwen said coldly. "The entire square can attest I haven't been near your forge." Doubt rippled through the crowd. Not enough to stop them, but enough to make them hesitate. It was all the opening Maren needed. She twisted hard, breaking Pruitt's grip, and ran. The village became a maze of shadows and shouting voices. Maren's bound hands made her clumsy, but desperation lent her speed. She heard boots pounding behind her, torches bobbing like angry fireflies. "There!" someone yelled. A stone whizzed past her head, striking the wall beside her. Another hit her shoulder, sending pain lancing down her arm. The bond blazed, and she felt Rorik's answering fury like thunder in her bones. Pruitt was faster than the others, gaining ground. His hand closed on her cloak, yanking her backward. And then the shadows came alive. Sable dropped from a rooftop, all teeth and claws, landing between Maren and her pursuer. Two other wolves materialized from the darkness, their growls vibrating through the air. "Back away from her," Sable snarled. "Now!" Pruitt stumbled, terror whitening his face. The villagers skidded to a halt, torches raised, weapons drawn. For a moment, violence hung in the air like a blade waiting to fall. Then Rorik stepped into the square. He didn't run, didn't crouch or snarl. He simply walked forward, every inch the king, his presence filling the space like a physical force. More wolves appeared behind him, a silent wall of fur and muscle and gleaming eyes. "Touch her again," Rorik said, his voice soft and terrible, "and I will teach you why your ancestors feared the old wood." No one moved. Rorik's eyes found Maren's across the distance. The bond surged between them, and she understood the question in his gaze. "What do you choose?" Maren pulled her hands free of the loosened rope and walked toward him. Not dragged, not fleeing, choosing. "I will not be your scapegoat," she said, loud enough for the entire village to hear. "Not anymore." She took Rorik's outstretched hand, and the bond flared gold and bright as sunrise. The wolves closed ranks around them, and together they walked into the forest. Behind them, Corvin's voice rose above the stunned silence, sharp with fury and fear. "At dawn we march. Bring me the Alpha's head and the witch alive. I'll pay 100 silver marks to whoever delivers them." The hunt had begun. The pack council chamber felt smaller now, walls pressing in with the weight of too many voices raised in fury. Maren stood at the center again, but this time the hostility wasn't veiled behind diplomatic words. It was raw and bleeding, like the arrow wound Edda had just finished binding on the young wolf's shoulder. "They hunted her through the streets like an animal," Garan snarled, his massive frame vibrating with barely restrained violence. "They struck her with stones. And now Corvin has put a price on all our heads." He turned to Rorik, eyes blazing. "How much more will you endure before you admit that humans understand only one language?" "Careful," Rorik said quietly, but there was steel beneath the silk. "You're about to say something you can't take back." "Good." Garan stepped forward. "Because I'm tired of taking back truth to spare your feelings. They've declared war, Rorik. We answer with fangs or we die with our bellies exposed." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the gathered wolves. Even some of the elders nodded, their faces grim. Maren's chest ached where the bond pulled tight. She could feel Rorik's struggle like it was her own, the terrible weight of a crown that demanded he protect his people while knowing that protection might require becoming the monster the village believed him to be. "The human shows her mark," an elder said, pointing at Maren's wrist where the golden shimmer still pulsed faintly beneath her skin. "The river has chosen. But the river also demands balance. What balance is there in sheltering the one whose people hunt us?" "She didn't hunt anyone," Sable interjected, her voice sharp. "She warned us. She tried to stop them. And failed," Garan said flatly. "Her good intentions don't stop arrows." Rorik's hands clenched at his sides. The air around him seemed to thicken, charged with the kind of power that made even Garan take a half step back. When the Alpha King spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries. "Enough." The word cracked through the chamber like breaking ice. "I am still king of this pack. And while I draw breath, we do not slaughter the innocent to satisfy bloodlust." His eyes swept the room. "Garan wants war. War is easy. It asks nothing of us except rage. But survival, true survival, requires something harder." "What?" Garan challenged. "Mercy for those who show us none. Strategy." Rorik's gaze was unflinching. "Corvin wants us to attack. He's counting on it. Every wolf that crosses that boundary with violence proves his lies true. We become the monsters, and he becomes the hero." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Is that what you want? To hand him exactly what he needs to unite every village from here to the coastal roads against us?" Silence, heavy and uncomfortable. "We meet at Ravenridge Ford," Rorik continued. "Neutral ground. We bring proof of Corvin's manipulations. We offer terms. One chance for the humans to see truth before blood writes the only story left to tell. And if they refuse?" an elder asked quietly. Rorik's expression hardened. "Then we defend our home with everything we have." But we won't be the ones who closed the door on peace. The council dispersed slowly, tension still crackling in the air like summer lightning. Garan left without a word, his disapproval written in every rigid line of his shoulders. Maren sagged against the wall, exhaustion finally catching up with her. Rorik's hand touched her elbow, gentle despite the violence still humming beneath his skin. Come. You need rest. The lodge Rorik led her to was smaller than the council chamber, built into the embrace of an ancient oak. Inside, firelight danced across walls carved with symbols that seemed to shift and breathe. Furs covered the floor, soft beneath Maren's aching feet. The scent of pine and something uniquely Rorik filled the space, warm and strangely comforting. Sleep, Rorik said, gesturing to a pile of furs in the corner. The bond will pull at you less if you're rested. Maren sank onto the makeshift bed, her body crying out for rest even as her mind spun with everything that had happened. Rorik turned to leave, but she caught his wrist. Stay, she whispered. Please. I don't want to be alone. His eyes searched hers, and she saw the war there, between duty and desire, between what he wanted and what he thought she needed. I won't touch you, he said finally. Not unless you ask. I know. He settled against the far wall, close enough that she could feel his presence but far enough to give her space. Maren closed her eyes, and sleep took her like a stone dropping into deep water. The dream came sharp and vivid, more memory than imagination. She stood in a clearing she'd never seen, watching a younger Rorik, his face less weathered but already carrying the weight of leadership. Around him, wolves and humans mingled freely, children playing together while their parents negotiated over maps spread across a fallen log. The boundary stones will mark shared hunting grounds, a human woman said, her voice kind. She wore the robes of a village elder, her hair streaked with gray. Your pack keeps the deep forest. We keep the cleared land. And the riverbank belongs to both. Agreed, Rorik said, and there was hope in his voice, fragile and bright. Then the scene shifted, smoke and screaming. Fire consumed the village, flames leaping from roof to roof with unnatural speed. Maren saw Rorik running toward the blaze, desperate to help, only to be met with arrows and accusations. The wolves did this, someone shrieked. They broke the treaty. We didn't. Rorik shouted back, but his voice was drowned by the roar of flames and fear. She saw him retreat into the forest, betrayal and grief written across his face. Saw the years that followed, the slow hardening of hope into caution, trust into vigilance. Saw him become the guarded king she'd met by the river, carrying the weight of a peace that had died in fire and lies. The dream shifted again, and she was in his skin, feeling the trap's teeth sink into his shoulder, the cold river dragging him under. The certainty that this was how it ended, alone and bleeding, another casualty of a war he'd tried so hard to prevent. Then her hands pulling at the iron. Her voice, promising she wouldn't hurt him. Her blood mixing with his, and the sudden shocking warmth of connection after so many years of isolation. Mine, something ancient whispered through the bond. Finally mine. Maren woke gasping, her cheeks wet with tears that weren't entirely hers. Rorik knelt beside her, his hand hovering near her face but not quite touching. I'm sorry, he said roughly. The bond, it shares more when we sleep. I should have warned you. You loved her, Maren whispered. The woman who made the first treaty. His jaw tightened. I respected her. She was one of the few humans who saw us as people, not monsters. And someone killed her. Started the fire to break the peace. Corvin's father. Rorik's voice was bitter. Though we could never prove it. By the time the flames died, he'd already positioned himself as the village's savior. Maren sat up, her hand finding his without thinking. The bond flared at the contact, warm and insistent. The claim, she said softly. What does it really mean? Rorik was quiet for a long moment. It means the river recognized something between us. Potential for balance. For bridge building. He turned his hand over, palm up, giving her the choice to hold or release. But it's not ownership, Maren. It's not a chain. I can offer you protection, partnership, a place in the pack. But whether you accept, whether you choose to formalize the bond through ritual, that's yours to decide. And if I don't, then you remain under my protection as long as you wish it. No strings. No demands. His eyes met hers, golden and earnest. I won't force this on you. Not ever. Maren's throat tightened. She thought of the village, of Pruitt's hands on her wrists, of Corvin's casual violence. Then she thought of this lodge, of Sable's fierce grin, of Edda's grudging respect, of the way Rorik had stepped between her and danger without hesitation. I'm not ready, she said finally. Not yet. But I'm not running either. Something in his expression softened, like ice beginning to thaw. That's enough. More than enough. Before either could say more, Sable burst through the entrance, her face pale beneath the dirt and scratches. Rorik, she panted. The scouts found something. You need to see this. The deer carcass lay in a small clearing, illuminated by torchlight that made the blood look black. But it wasn't the blood that made Maren's stomach turn. It was the way the animal had been killed. Wolves don't do this, Garan said, his voice unusually subdued. He pointed to the wounds with a stick, careful not to touch them. Look at the claw marks. Too narrow. Too precise. And the throat wasn't torn, it was punctured. Like something with teeth shaped wrong. Edda knelt beside the carcass, her nose wrinkling. Tar, she said. And old smoke. The same smell from the goat kills. What kind of predator smells like smoke? Maren asked. The kind that isn't a predator at all, Edda replied grimly. She stood, brushing dirt from her knees. There are old stories. Legends from before my grandmother's time. About creatures that live in the marshes past the old wood. Fenschreiks they were called. Scavengers that learn to mimic other predators' kills to start territory wars. Then they feed on whatever's left when both sides destroy each other. That's just a story, Garan said, but he didn't sound certain. So were we, Rorik said quietly. To the humans. He looked at the carcass, his expression thoughtful. If something is deliberately staging these attacks, making them look like wolf kills, then Corvin isn't just an opportunist. He's working with someone or something. Or he found a fun shrike and is using it, Sable suggested. Either way, this proves the attacks are manufactured. Will the humans believe us? Maren asked. Some might, Rorik said. If we bring proof. If Sister Anwen can verify the old records and we can show them this. He gestured to the deer. Raven Ridge Ford tomorrow at dusk. We bring everything we have. They were walking back to the settlement when Garen's shout stopped them cold. Rorik! The boundary! A small token hung from one of the marker stones, tied with human cord. A strip of cloth torn from Maren's dress, the one she'd worn the night she saved Rorik. It swayed in the breeze like an accusation. Garan rounded on her, fury twisting his features. You left this. A signal to your people. I didn't, Maren said, her voice shaking. I've been with you with witnesses the entire time. Then how did it get there? Garan demanded. Rorik stepped between them, his presence a wall. Someone in this pack is trying to undermine us. Trying to turn us against each other when we need unity most. His voice dropped to something dangerous. And I will find out who. He pulled the cloth down, holding it up to the torchlight. But until I do, Maren remains under sanctuary. King's law. Anyone who touches her answers to me personally. The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Garen's jaw worked, but he stepped back. One chance, Rorik. That's all the parley gets. If the humans refuse peace, I lead the war council. Agreed, Rorik said. That night, Maren worked with Sister Anwen's records, preparing their case. Maps of the old boundaries. Ledgers showing Corvin's profits from fear. Sketches of the trap designs that matched his workshop. This might work, Maren said, hope flickering in her chest. Then the ground trembled. Not an earthquake, something else. A vibration that traveled through stone and soil like a living thing. Outside, wolves howled in alarm. And from somewhere deep in the marsh beyond the old wood, something answered. Not a wolf's howl. Not human. Something that scraped against the ears like claws on slate. A sound that raised every hair on Maren's body and made the bond in her chest recoil. Rorik appeared in the doorway, his face grim. What was that? Maren whispered. Proof, he said, that we're running out of time. The Funschreik was awake. And it was hunting. Dusk painted Ravenridge Ford in shades of blood and shadow. The river ran shallow here. Its current gentle enough to cross without drowning but deep enough to feel dangerous. Mist rose from the water like breath, curling around the ancient boundary stones that marked where human land met the wildwood. Carved symbols weathered by centuries glowed faintly in the dying light, reminders of oaths made and broken. Maren stood at the water's edge. The bond in her chest pulled taut as a bowstring. On one side of the ford, Rorik waited with Garan's sable and a line of wolves in human form, their eyes gleaming gold in the twilight. On the other side, Corvin approached with Pruitt and a dozen armed hunters, torches blazing like war banners. Sister Anwen stood beside Maren, clutching her leather-bound ledger like a shield. The old woman's hands trembled slightly, but her voice was steady when she spoke. This is neutral ground, she called across the water. Sacred ground where our ancestors made peace. Let it witness truth tonight. Corvin stopped at the opposite bank, his broad frame silhouetted against the torchlight. Truth. The only truth here is that wolves have terrorized Brackenridge for the last time. His eyes found Maren, contempt curling his lip. And that girl chose beasts over her own people. I chose truth over lies, Maren shot back, stepping forward. The water lapped at her boots, cold enough to make her catch her breath. The attacks were staged. The traps are yours, Corvin. The arrows came from your forge. You manufactured this war. Murmurs rippled through the hunters. Some shifted uncomfortably, doubt flickering across their faces. Listen to her, Corvin scoffed. Bewitched and spouting nonsense. Look at her wrist, the mark the Alpha put on her. She's his creature now, dancing to his will. Rorik's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. I have never controlled her. Not with magic, not with force, not with anything but the truth she chose to hear. He stepped forward, water rising to his calves. The bond we share is not ownership. It's recognition. The river saw something in her worth protecting. The river saw a fool, Corvin spat. Sister Anwen raised the ledger high. I have proof. Records from 17 years ago. A treaty signed by both sides, guaranteeing boundaries and shared prosperity. And documentation of the fire that broke it. The fire that Corvin's father profited from while families burned. Ancient history, Corvin said dismissively. My father rebuilt this village from ashes. He saved us. After he burned us, Maren said quietly. Just like you've been staging attacks to justify another war. Because war is profitable for a blacksmith, isn't it, Corvin? More weapons, more traps, more fear to keep people dependent on your iron. Garan growled low in his throat. Enough talk. He admits nothing. Let us end this. No, Rorik said firmly. Not yet. Maren pulled the broken arrowhead from her pocket, the one Sister Anwen had found in Corvin's workshop. She held it up, letting firelight catch the unique fletching. This matches the arrow that wounded one of Rorik's wolves. Found in your forge, Corvin. Fresh made. Explain that. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Corvin's face. Several hunters turned to look at him, questions forming on their lips. Then chaos erupted. The crossbow bolt came from somewhere in the trees behind the human line, silent and deadly. It wasn't aimed at Rorik. It was aimed at Maren. The bond screamed a warning half a heartbeat before the bolt would have struck. Rorik moved faster than thought, diving forward, his hand catching the bolt mid-flight. The iron tip sliced through his palm, blood welling dark and hot. Ambush! Garan roared, his form rippling, claws erupting from his fingertips. The hunters raised weapons, torches swinging wild. Pruitt drew his sword. The wolves snarled, closing ranks. Wait! Rorik commanded, but his voice was drowned by shouting and the clash of steel. Then something else joined the chaos. The Von Shrike erupted from the reeds downstream, a nightmare of wrong angles and too many limbs. It looked like a wolf if wolves were carved from shadow and hunger, with claws too long and narrow, teeth that curved like fishhooks, and eyes that gleamed with cold intelligence. The stench of tar and old smoke rolled off it in waves. It moved faster than anything that size should move, a blur of black fur and clicking joints. The creature's first strike took down a hunter on the human side, claws raking across his chest before anyone could react. The man's scream cut off abruptly as he crumpled into the shallow water, blood blooming dark. Defend! Corvin shouted, but his voice carried confusion, not command. The Von Shrike pivoted, impossibly fast, and lunged at the wolf line. Sable barely shoved a young scout out of the way, taking a glancing blow that sent her sprawling. The creature's claws left 4 deep gouges across her shoulder. Garan charged, all fury and muscle, but the Von Shrike twisted mid-leap, evading him like smoke. It landed in the center of the ford, water splashing around its 2 long legs. Its head swiveled, surveying both sides with predatory calculation. It wanted chaos, wanted both sides to blame each other while it fed on the corpses left behind. Maren saw the pattern forming, the way fear was about to ignite into slaughter. She thought of the wolf in the river, drowning and helpless. Thought of the choice she'd made to wade into cold water and pull at iron teeth even when everyone told her to walk away. Some choices you make with your head. Others you make with the part of you that refuses to let mercy die. She ran forward. Maren, no. Rorik's voice cracked with panic, but she was already moving, splashing into the shallows where the Von Shrike crouched. Her mind raced through everything Edda had taught her about predators, about plants, about the old knowledge that separated healers from herb gatherers. Von Shrikes lived in marshes. They hunted in stagnant water. Their senses adapted to decay and rot. Clean water confused them. Maren scooped up handfuls of river silt, the kind that carried silverweed and mintroot, plants that thrived in rushing current. She hurled it at the creature's face, and the Von Shrike recoiled, shaking its head violently. The clean scent disrupted its hunting focus. The torches! Maren shouted. Fire and smoke, drive it back. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Human and wolf stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Then Rorik understood. Do it, he commanded, and his wolves moved instantly, some shifting fully to lupin form, others staying human but grabbing burning branches from the dropped torches. The hunters hesitated only a moment longer before Pruitt, of all people, stepped forward and thrust his torch toward the creature. Come on, he yelled. Before it kills us all. The Von Shrike hissed, a sound like metal scraping stone, and backed toward deeper water. But Sable was already there, wounded but fierce, herding it away from the shallows. Garan came at it from the other side, and suddenly human and wolf were moving together, not as allies but as desperate survivors facing a common threat. The creature lunged once more, aiming for Sister Anwen, who had fallen in the chaos. Rorik was there first. He put himself between the old woman and the Von Shrike's claws, taking a blow across his ribs that would have disemboweled anyone weaker. The impact drove him to his knees, but he didn't fall. His hand shot out, catching the creature's throat mid-strike. Not her, he growled, and there was something ancient and terrible in his voice, the Alpha King fully present. He hurled the Von Shrike backward with strength that shouldn't be possible. The creature hit the water hard, screeched once more, then scrambled toward the far bank. Toward Brackenridge. It's heading for the village, someone shouted. Corvin stood frozen, staring at the chaos around him. At the wounded hunter lying in the shallows. At Sister Anwen, clutching Rorik's arm in gratitude. at the wolves who had fought beside his men instead of against them. Then his coat shifted, and something fell from an inner pocket, landing in the mud with a wet thud. A leather pouch heavy with coin. And beneath it, a torn piece of parchment covered in sketches. Trap designs. Tack patterns. Payments made to someone marked only as Mel. Marsh lurker. Maren picked up the parchment with shaking hands. You hired it, she whispered. You found the von Schreik and paid it to stage attacks. To start this war. Corvin's face went white, then red with fury. That means nothing. Could be anyone's. It's your handwriting, Sister Anwen said coldly. I've seen enough of your father's ledgers to recognize the family script. The hunters stared at Corvin, betrayal and horror warring on their faces. You got Thomas killed, Pruitt said, his voice shaking as he looked at the fallen hunter. For what? For coin. For power, Rorik said quietly. For the same reason his father burned the village 17 years ago. Fear makes people controllable. Corvin's hand went to his belt, where a dagger hung. Garen's claws were at his throat before he could draw it. Don't, Rorik warned, and Garan froze, trembling with the effort of restraint. Rorik walked forward, each step deliberate, until he stood before Corvin. You wanted a monster, he said softly. Wanted someone to blame for the cruelty you inflicted on your own people. But I won't give you that satisfaction. He turned to face both sides, his voice carrying across the ford. Maren Holt stands under my protection, not because I own her, but because she chose compassion when the world demanded violence. She is the bridge the old laws spoke of. And anyone, human or wolf, who threatens her threatens the peace we're trying to build. Several hunters lowered their weapons. One older man, his face weathered and tired, nodded slowly. What about him? Pruitt asked, gesturing to Corvin. That's for your people to decide, Rorik said. We've done our part. The rest is yours. Two hunters moved forward, gripping Corvin's arms. He struggled, snarling curses, but they held firm. This isn't over, Corvin spat. You think one monster proves anything? There will be others. There will always be others. Then we'll face them together, Sister Anwen said quietly. The way we should have from the beginning. The von Schreik's howl echoed from the direction of Brackenridge. Closer now, hungry and eager. Maren's blood ran cold. The village. It's going for the village. Children, Sister Anwen gasped. The evening market. There will be families. Rorik's eyes met Maren's across the ford, and the bond flared between them, bright and certain. We run, he said. Together. This time no one argued. Wolves and hunters moved as one, splashing across Ravenridge Ford toward the village lights glowing in the distance. Toward the screams that had already begun. Toward the real battle that would decide whether mercy could truly heal what fear had broken, or whether some wounds ran too deep to ever close. They reached Brackenridge as flames began to lick at the sky. The von Schreik had struck the eastern edge first, where cottages clustered closest to the old wood. Livestock pens lay torn open, chickens scattered in panicked flurries of feathers. A cow bellowed in terror somewhere in the smoke. And beneath it all screams, high and desperate, the sound of people who had never truly believed the monsters were real until teeth found flesh. Maren's lungs burned as she ran, the bond thrumming with Rorik's presence at her shoulder. Behind them, wolves and hunters moved together in a formation that would have been impossible hours ago. Desperation forging an alliance fear had denied them. There! Sable pointed toward the village square, where the von Schreik crouched atop the well, its two long limbs splayed like a spider's. It had something in its jaws, shaking it viciously. A child's doll, torn and bloody. Where's the child? Maren gasped. Safe, Garan growled, his eyes tracking movement near the cottages. In there. Mother pulled her inside just in time. But the creature had tasted panic now. It dropped the doll and turned toward the huddled cottages, where faces pressed against windows, pale with terror. If we don't help them, Maren said, her voice raw, We become exactly the story they've been telling about us. The monsters who let children burn. Rorik's jaw tightened. He knew the risk. Knew that entering the village could still be a trap, that frightened people with weapons were as dangerous as any predator. But he also knew Maren was right. "Wolves with me," he commanded. Herd the villagers toward the square. Get them to open ground where the creature can't corner them. He looked at the hunters. "You know your village better than we do. Block the alleys. Cut off escape routes toward the old wood." For a heartbeat, the hunters hesitated. Then Pruitt stepped forward, sword drawn. "You heard him. Move." Chaos erupted into coordinated chaos. Wolves in lupin form darted through the narrow streets, their presence terrifying but purposeful. They drove panicked villagers out of dark corners and dead-end alleys, herding them like sheep toward the central square where torches burned bright and weapons could be raised in defense. The von Schreik shrieked, furious at being denied easy prey. It leaped from the well to a rooftop, claws tearing through thatch like paper. Fire caught where its talons scraped, hungry flames spreading fast. "Water!" Sister Anwen shouted, already organizing a bucket line. "Before the whole village burns." Maren's mind raced. The creature was fast, too fast to corner in open combat. But it was also a marsh predator, adapted to stagnant water and decay. The same weakness she'd exploited at the ford could work again, if she could get it to the right place. To Wraithwater, where this had all begun. "Edda!" Maren caught the healer's arm as she passed. "The river. We need to prepare a trap. Silverweed, mintroot, anything that grows in clean current. Can you?" "I know what you're thinking," Edda said grimly. "And it's insane. It's all we have." Edda's mouth pressed into a hard line, then she nodded. "Sable. With me. We're going to the riverbank." They vanished into the smoke, moving with practiced efficiency. Rorik appeared at Maren's side, blood streaking his torn shirt from the wound he'd taken at the ford. "What's the plan?" "Lure it to the Wraithwater. Use the current and the clean water plants to disorient it. Then I kill it," Rorik finished. Before Maren could respond, a timber crashed down from a burning roof, sending sparks spiraling into the night. The von Schreik followed the chaos, landing in the square where villagers had gathered. It moved to strike, claws raised toward an old woman clutching a child. Garan hit it broadside, all muscle and fury. The impact sent them both sprawling, Garen's claws raking across the creature's flank. Black ichor, not blood, oozed from the wounds. The von Schreik twisted, faster than thought, and caught Garan across the shoulder. The war captain roared, stumbling back. Then hunters were there, spears jabbing, forcing the creature to retreat. Not coordinated, not perfect, but together. Fighting side by side with wolves they'd been ready to slaughter hours before. The von Schreik shrieked again, a sound of frustration and rage. It was losing and it knew it. That's when Corvin made his move. He'd been bound, hands tied, guarded by two hunters. But in the chaos, with everyone focused on the creature, he'd worked the ropes loose. Maren saw him too late, saw the torch in his hand, saw the wild desperation in his eyes. "This ends now," Corvin roared. He hurled the torch not at the creature, but at Rorik. At the Alpha King who stood between him and the power he'd built on lies. The torch arced through the air, trailing sparks. Rorik could have dodged, could have shifted, moved, saved himself. Instead, he stepped in front of Maren. The impact drove him backward, flames catching on his sleeve. He went down hard, and the bond in Maren's chest screamed with shared pain. "No!" The word tore from her throat. She was on her knees beside him, hands batting at the flames, her palms blistering. Someone threw water, dousing the fire. Rorik's eyes found hers, gold and fierce despite the pain. "I'm all right," he gasped. The von Schreik saw its opening. It lunged toward them, claws extended, jaws wide. Garan intercepted it, wounded shoulder and all, buying them precious seconds. "Get him up," he snarled at Maren. Get him to the river. Maren hauled Rorik to his feet, her smaller frame straining under his weight. The bond pulsed between them, sharing strength, sharing pain, sharing the desperate need to survive. Behind them, Pruitt's voice rang out, shaking but clear. Corvin hired that thing. I saw the ledgers. He paid it to attack us so we'd blame the wolves. Sister Anwen stepped forward, holding the parchment high. Everything Brackenridge suffered, every death, every wound, was orchestrated by the man who claimed to protect us. The hunters turned as one, faces dark with betrayal. Corvin backed toward the alley, his torch still clutched in one hand. You're all fools. The wolves will turn on you the moment. The wolves are dying beside us, an old hunter said quietly. While you throw torches at their king. Corvin ran. Not toward the old wood. Toward the river. Toward Wraithwater. Maren and Rorik reached the riverbank as the Von Shrike broke free from Garen's hold and gave chase. Behind them, wolves and hunters followed, a strange parade of former enemies united by fury at the true monster in their midst. The river sounded like teeth again, gnawing stone, ripping foam. But this time Maren wasn't afraid. Edda and Sable had worked fast. The shallows were thick with crushed mint and silverweed, the clean scent sharp in the air. They'd woven river willow into a loose net, anchored to the rocks just beneath the surface. It's ready, Edda called. But you'll need to lure it in deep. Maren looked at Rorik. His shirt was burned, his ribs bleeding through makeshift bandages, but his eyes were clear. Together, she asked. Always, he said. They waded into the Wraithwater, the current pulling at their legs. The cold bit deep, familiar and merciless. Maren felt the echo of that first night, when she'd chosen to step into these same black waters to save a dying wolf. The Von Shrike crashed through the reeds, tar stench rolling off it in waves. It saw them standing in the current and shrieked triumph. Now! Maren shouted. She and Rorik dove aside as the creature lunged. Its claws caught nothing but water. It landed in the shallows, right where Edda had laid the trap. The clean water scent hit it like a physical blow. The Von Shrike reeled, disoriented, shaking its head violently. Its claws tangled in the willow net. Rorik rose from the water, shifted fully now, a wolf the size of a warhorse with fur like midnight and eyes like molten gold. He hit the Von Shrike with the full force of an alpha king defending his territory. The impact drove the creature deeper into the current. Water filled its lungs, its movements growing sluggish. Rorik's jaws closed on its throat, and this time there was no escape. The Von Shrike thrashed once, twice, then went still. Black ichor spread across the water, then dissipated, carried away by the river's relentless current. Rorik shifted back to human form, gasping, bleeding from a dozen wounds. Maren caught him before he fell, both of them collapsing into the shallows, exhausted and alive. On the bank, Corvin stood frozen, staring at the dead creature. Pruitt and two other hunters approached him slowly, weapons drawn. It's over, Corvin, Pruitt said quietly. You're done. Corvin's face twisted with rage and despair. He looked at Maren, at Rorik, at the wolves and humans standing together. This isn't over, he spat. There will be others. There will always be. No, Sister Anwen said, stepping forward with the old ledger. There will be accountability. There will be truth. And there will be a reckoning for what you've done. The hunters took Corvin's arms, leading him away. Not gently. 3 days later, the village and the pack gathered again at Ravenridge Ford. But this time there were no weapons, no torches. Only people, tired and grieving, ready to build something better from the ashes. The new treaty was carved into fresh stone, words chosen carefully by both sides. Boundary markers reset. Trade routes established. A yearly council where grievances could be aired and resolved. No iron traps. No unprovoked hunts. And a shared patrol system to watch for threats that belonged to neither world. Corvin's fate was decided by village law. exile, with a brand on his wrist that marked him as Oathbreaker. He would carry that mark wherever he went, a warning to any community that might shelter him. Maren watched him go, escorted to the coastal road by grim-faced hunters. She felt no triumph, only exhaustion and a strange, fragile hope. When the crowd dispersed, Rorik found her by the riverbank, where moonlight turned the water silver instead of black. "There's something I need to ask you," he said quietly. Maren turned, and the bond thrummed between them, warm and certain. "The ritual," Rorik continued. "The formal acceptance of the bond. I won't pressure you. I won't." "Yes," Maren said. He blinked. "Yes. I choose this. I choose you." She took his hands, feeling the calluses and scars, the strength that had been used to protect instead of destroy. "Not because the river decided for me, but because I've seen who you are when the world gives you every reason to be a monster, and you choose mercy instead." Something in his expression cracked open, vulnerable and raw. "Maren." She pressed a finger to his lips. "Show me the ritual." Under the full moon, with the river as witness, Edda performed the bonding rite. She painted symbols on their wrists with river clay and ash, speaking words in a language older than Brackenridge, older than the old wood itself. Rorik offered Maren a pendant carved from river stone, worn smooth by centuries of current. "This belonged to the first bridge maker," he said. "The woman who made the original treaty. I've carried it for 17 years, waiting for someone worthy to wear it again." Maren accepted it with trembling hands. In return, she gave him a braided cord made from herbs she'd gathered, from yarrow and mint and willow, plants that had saved his life twice now. "I don't have crowns or ancient heirlooms," she said softly. "But I have this, the knowledge that heals instead of harms. And I give it freely." Rorik tied the cord around his wrist, and the bond flared gold and bright between them, no longer a thread but a rope, strong enough to bear weight, flexible enough to allow freedom. When their lips met, the river sang. Maren stood at the edge of Wraithwater weeks later, watching the current flow. It still sounded like teeth sometimes, when the moon was dark and the wind blew cold. But it also sounded like possibility, like the seam that stitched two worlds together instead of tearing them apart. She wasn't the village's curse anymore. Wasn't the outcast they blamed when crops failed or children fell ill. She was the bridge. The one who'd refused to let fear write the ending. And as Rorik appeared at her side, his hand finding hers, Maren realized that mercy wasn't weakness after all. It was the strongest magic in the world. The kind that transformed monsters into protectors, enemies into allies, and a dying wolf by a river into a king who would move mountains to keep his people safe. The Wraithwater flowed on, carrying their story downstream, into the future they were building together. One choice at a time.